and welcome to Beaverdale Books. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. Before we begin, I have to do my little spiel about upcoming events. And on tomorrow night, we have Felicia Bab-Cass, and she's going to talk about her book, Yield, a Quixotic Quest to Rescue Virtue. I have to practice that one. Then on Thursday, Melinda Wickman will share about her latest book, Exercise Finished. It's a fun, cozy mystery about a murder that happens at a dog obedience event. You can find all the details on our website, or you can pick up a list of our upcoming events. And then Saturday, we have the local author fair. We're going to have 7 local authors all here between 1 and 3, so that'll be a fun thing too. All right, for tonight's book, Kevin Mason doesn't just write about history, he walks it. His 371-mile journey retracing the original Dragoon route across Iowa blends scholarship with storytelling captured through video essays, photography, and writing. This modern-day trek, featured on Iowa PBS's Iowa Life and Iowa Public Radio's Talk of Iowa, brings the past into the present, offering a compelling look at how landscapes remember. The result is a powerful contribution to environmental history, regional studies, and Indigenous scholarship, one that reveals the layered interactions between land use, policy, and historical change. Kevin is an assistant professor of history at the University of Northern Iowa. He formerly served as an associate professor of history at Waldorf University, where he chaired the Department of History, Geography, and Political Science. He is the author of Inkpaduta in Iowa, Dakota Decline, Dispossession, and Erasure in the Annals of Iowa. I'll get there. A Mildred Thorne and Charles Aldrich Iowa History Award-winning article. He has also published in Little Village, the Middle West Review, and the Journal of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. Joining Kevin is Andrew Klump. Andrew is a public historian, educator, and cultural leader with over a decade of experience advancing museum, humanities, and educational initiatives in Iowa and beyond. He is currently the Education and Outreach Division Manager of the State Historical Society of Iowa here in Des Moines, where he leads statewide public history, humanities, and educational programs and serves as editor of the Annals of Iowa. Now, please join me in a warm welcome for Kevin and Andrew.
Thank you, Jan. It's good to be here. I always tell Jan it's easy to rope me into things because I live on Ashby Avenue. So if you're from Beaverdale, it's like it's 5 blocks. Like anytime, Jan. Anytime.
I take you up on that.
I know. And Kevin, you mentioned Kevin was one of the first articles I worked on when I became the editor of the Annals of Iowa. The Annals of Iowa, the scholarly history journal published by the State Historical Society of Iowa. I had just started in 2020. I think your article came out in 2021, but one of the first things that was fully under my editorship was one of Kevin's articles. So I've known Kevin for the better part of a decade and worked with Kevin in a professional capacity for, again, the better part of a decade. So,
and always makes my stuff way better, which Andrew's my favorite editor, so I was glad he was able to do this.
That's the point of a good editor, it's about you. So what we'll do tonight is really just have a conversation. I've got questions about Kevin's book. We'll talk, have a conversation, and then turn it over for you all to be a part of it. So we'll probably spend about 45 minutes with my questions, talking to Kevin. Then we'll turn it over to you for 15, 20 minutes, whatever the crowd desires. And then there should be time too before the end of the event for you to purchase books, get signatures, talk to Kevin afterwards. So that's the plan. I always like to set it out ahead of time, and we'll dive right in. Hearing no complaints about that plan, and taking no complaints about that plan. We'll jump right in. So Kevin, you were mentioning earlier, I'm going to jump off there, that this book started on a steamy night in a garage a block from here. Tell us his story.
So that's pretty fair. It was the Iowa State Fair, and this would have been almost a decade ago now. Is before I was done with my PhD at Iowa State. And actually, I won't read a lot of stuff tonight, but I will use that story because it also opens the book. So I think that's a really easy place to begin. Ever read this? A friend asked as he pulled a beat-up copy of a small book from behind a dented toolbox. The book he handed me was Notes on the Wisconsin Territory, particularly in reference to the Iowa District by Albert Miller Lee. I flipped the pages, my eyes searching for the copyright. 1836. As I scanned, my friend explained how the modest book held important keys to understanding Iowa's past. According to the State Historical Society of Iowa's foreword and the reprinted version I held, the book first gave the state of Iowa a name, provided some of the first maps, and included some of the earliest recorded impressions by someone sent to take the measure of the place. Lee had traveled with a group of men called the Dragoons, scrawling his observations into a snapshot of Iowa the moment before everything changed. And I don't know if it was the heat of the day at the fair or the liquid courage from the bush light, but at some point in the evening, the conversation turned towards, we should do it. We should go and we should retrace the route of the Dragoons up the Des Moines River and see what Iowa looks like compared to what they saw back in 1835. And by the next morning, my friend had sobered up enough that he's like, I'm not doing that. Are you crazy? But it seems kind of planted in the back of my mind that that's one of the things that I think this book really has come to represent to me as I've been thinking about it since it came out in April, is this is really just an exercise in letting those kind of seeds that we all have in the back of our mind really grow into something. And this grew into a project that I never really anticipated taking this form. It grew into the Notes on Iowa project, which many different people interact with. And it grew into a lot of different relationships with people, many of which are in this room that I hadn't met before, and has really radically changed how I think about our shared past in a pretty meaningful way.
Yeah, great. It's interesting for so many of us who are historians. Some of these projects, none of my projects started in a garage over bush light, much to my brother's dismay. But these little seeds that you kind of pick on, and then you can't get rid of them. I wonder. You mentioned. Can you hear me? Okay, is that better? Okay. You mentioned. You didn't anticipate this being the form the project would necessarily take. So can you talk a little bit about what forms the project has taken, and maybe where you think it'll go from here? Because I feel like you're not done with it yet. In some ways, some of these things continue on. So what did you hope for? What actually happened? And what do you think is the life of this project afterwards?
Well, so this project really started as a joke. I think in the ways that we joke about things that we were kind of if you have these big crazy, walking up the Des Moines River is a stupid idea. And I started to treat it that way, where I would just I'd throw it out as a joke. And then the closer I got to graduating from a PhD program at Iowa State, I was working on a very difficult moment in Iowa history, which is what Iowans commonly call the Spirit Lake Massacre of 1857. And I knew that I wanted to work on a little bit different project that would still allow me to work on environmental change in Iowa during the 1800s. And I don't know what it is about human beings, but whenever you finish something, people immediately start to ask you, well, what are you going to do next? And so I started to just throw out this befuddling response of, well, I'm going to walk across Iowa to chase the Dragoon expedition of 1835, because one of two things happened. People looked at me like I was crazy and changed the subject, or they just asked me what a dragoon was, and then I filibustered that until we changed the subject. And then I actually made that joke kind of in the wrong audience, which was an Iowa History 101 program for the State Historical Society. And somebody asked me that question at the end, and I said, well, I'm going to chase the Dragoons across Iowa. Next question. And I didn't think about it a whole lot until my phone rang about 30 minutes later. There's this guy named Rick Brewer, who's a producer at Talk of Iowa, and he goes, hey, we want to have you on to talk to Charity about your plan to walk across Iowa. And I remember I spent the rest of the day thinking about how I was going to go home, and like eventually we were doing the dishes, my wife and I was like, hey, you ever been to Farmington, Iowa? You want to go check it out? We're going to be undertaking this. But then it started to really kick this into a little bit different project where in the run-up to that appearance on Iowa Public Radio, I remember very clearly, we were out walking the dog at the Lime Creek Nature Center, and I kind of laid out this vision of I wanted to create a project that would be accessible history, that would be first and foremost free in a digital format that would allow me to develop new skills that I didn't have before. Like I didn't have like a camera that wasn't like this camera. I can't get it out of my pocket. I had never flown a drone, which has become a big part of the Notes on Iowa project, if you follow that. I had certainly never built a website. Like the first website iteration of Notes on Iowa was an 1845 Barrows map of Iowa, and it said, what is this? And you couldn't even click on it, and it did not deliver that answer. And as I kind of put that together, I knew that I wanted to, like, I had this very not well fleshed out idea of, I wanted to try to connect more people around Iowa stories, and I thought this would be a way for me to start developing those skills and pair them with the skills that I got in my graduate training as a historian. And then I did show up on Talk of Iowa, and Charity goes, historian's here to talk about his plan to write a new book on Iowa's environmental history. And I was like, all right, I guess that'll be a part of this too. And if you don't believe me that those videos were rugged, they're still on the Notes on Iowa website. Like the first one, I lit it with like construction lights, and it looks like I don't have eyebrows. So you can go look at that and see. I mean, I still make really bad videos on the internet that people critique. But I kind of thought that it would turn into some of those types of things. I never anticipated that it would grow into the scale of project that it has today. So the project, I decided to call it Notes on Iowa instead of like Chasing Dragoons, which was fortunate because it allowed me space to continue creating beyond that after the walking part of the project was finished. And then the book part of this, man, I remember distinctly. So when I walked up the Moon River in the summer of 2021, it took me 21 days, and I eventually arrived at Spirit Lake. And I was giving a talk kind of similar to this one at Iowa Lakeside Lab, which, heck of an opener if you can go, hey, I walked here from the Mississippi River. People were like, whoa. And I remember getting in the car after that and thinking to myself, the hard part is done. A year from now, I'll have this book done. It'll be the easiest thing to do. And if you can do simple math, which as a historian I struggle with sometimes, you'd realize 5 years elapsed between when I finished the walk and when this book came out. It went through 6 different drafts before it went to press a little over a year ago. And at one point was 225,000 words, which if you don't think about that, like I don't know, like that's 75,000 words, because the rest is all like 1,200 footnotes. But as Andrew will tell you, I have a tendency to overwrite things sometimes, and so like the cutting process was maybe easier, but man, it was a bear of a process, and I was just really committed to, this might be the only chance I ever get to do this. Like, I don't take for granted that, like, writing books about places you're from that mean a lot to you is a thing that doesn't happen to everyone. And so I was kind of just committed to, like, it was going to take as long as it was going to take, and it was going to be what it was going to be. And by the end, I was really pretty happy with this as a snapshot of what I knew about Iowa when this book went to press.
Yeah, I think that's such a... I love hearing that story because it helps to contextualize the book too, because I think, you know, I'm familiar with your work even before we worked together, you know, and so much of this is you can see how it's pulled out of a project that maybe wasn't thought of as a book and then became a book, right? You know, in ways that I think help to add depth to how much more there is behind everything that eventually made it through that really, you know, that killing your darlings stage of the editing process, right? So anyway, I think that's really inspiring to think about. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you know, how you how you decided to then structure or what to include. And so maybe that's a nice segue. You know, I'm thinking as you read the book, sometimes, and maybe this is because I know you and I know what stories you're going to tell, right? You know, like, so we're in one chapter and you're talking about, you know, the Dakota in the middle of the book, and I go, we're coming back to this. Like, we're going to get there at the end. But sometimes you're taking us through multiple segments, right? You know, you've got these kind of sequence of things that are woven through multiple chapters, and sometimes, you know, the Dutch, it's a one-off, you know, like we get them in Pella and that's it. And so I wonder how you thought about storytelling in a book like this where you're traveling through the state, when sometimes those stories are woven throughout, but the Des Moines River famously does not go through Orange City. So your shot is in Pella and that's it, right? And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you wrestled with including those stories and how you went about telling stories. 'Cause I think it's really interesting the ways that it's a kind of a tapestry. Sometimes we get a snapshot, and sometimes there's threads that weave throughout the book.
So I started to think about this. Well, there was a version of this book that I wrote as there were 5 distinct threads that I was trying to pull through every single chapter of the book, and that did not work. So every chapter in that iteration was going to start with the Dragoons, and then there's going to be a section on plant and animal life change, and there's going to be a section on human change, there's going to be a section on transportation change, and like I had a very clear plan because I don't know, as a community college person, I like to keep things simple, and that actually made it more convoluted. I was also trying to weave in like the experimentation that I did with this book is like, I bet I read 35 books on writing trying to read this book, and like at points in time, it ruined my ability to write, as evidenced by like an article I submitted to Andrew that will probably never be published, right? Like, I was trying all of these different things and trying to push myself to develop these new skills. And like I tell my students all the time, like, you're going to really suck at stuff when you start to try to do it. And like, there's a version of this book that like I wrote extensively about like my experience in walking up the river, and I thought that was a way to tie it together. And then eventually I decided, like, I'm not Cheryl Strand and this isn't wild, and you're probably not that interested in me finding myself along the Des Moines River.
Maybe that's another book, you know, like
it's on my external hard drive.
Finding myself at the Des Moines River, you know, like I'll read it. Jan will book you.
We'll sell
you
it.
know.
So eventually, I got some pretty good advice from somebody who's much smarter than me, who some of you probably know, who's written extensively. I mean, the first footnote in this book is Connie Moutel, on purpose, because she told me, you're not that interesting and you need to step out of the way of this story, which if you know her, that's the most Connie thing to say. She also told me after this book came out that it's a fine book, which I'll take as maybe the...
That's an A+.
Yeah, I was like,
That's high praise.
oh, my heart melted. I cried a little bit. But that was really useful, because then I decided I was going to pull the walk actually out of the book in a lot of different ways and let the geography root the book, but then completely remove myself from the story. And that allowed me to do the type of storytelling you're talking about. So if you are looking for 2 things in this book, I will tell you that aren't here. One is the kind of like walking narrative. You'll be more disappointed than the woman on Goodreads who's like, I wanted more of the walking stuff. Sorry, I'll send it to you in an email. You will not like it. The walk shows up in the prologue and the epilogue because I want to invite people on their own journey into Iowa history. And then it also shows up in the structure. So it took me 21 days to walk from basically Keokuk to Spirit Lake. And in those 21 days, I decided that would root the chapters of this book. So you'll notice even like Ledges State Park to Don Williams Recreation Area. That's a physical location. And that's these are just the days that it took me to walk up the river. And then I tried to pull something from the historical archive related to the Dragoons to kind of open and ground each chapter. So if I had the geography and I had the Dragoons, then I wanted to pull that forward. And I actually got this idea while I was walking through, of all places, Ottumwa, Iowa. I don't know. Anyway, I won't disparage Ottumwa publicly today. But while I was walking up the river, they announced that they were going to close the Ottumwa coal-fired power generating station. And that entire day, I was walking from downtown Ottumwa to Eddyville, and so I had to walk past the Ottumwa coal-fired generating station. There's like all of these big 18-wheelers pulling in, just in a huge line, bedded down with coal, that they're in here. And I was thinking about how, like, one of the things Albert Lee reiterated, not just in his little book about Iowa, but also in his journal repeatedly, was these coal deposits along this southern Des Moines River on the southern Iowa Drift Plain, and how they were going to open up settlement to Iowa in such a meaningful way. And he thought, and rightfully so to an extent, that like he kind of had this argument that, well, there's this incredible soil, and we're going to develop this Des Moines River into this major artery of navigation. These coal deposits will fuel the steamships that will then allow these crops that are being grown by commodity farmers down the Mississippi, and Iowa will feed the world. And he was kind of wrong about the development of the Des Moines River and the steamboats because of the greatest swindle in our history, maybe. But he was right about the coal driving that settlement in southern Iowa. And that's kind of where it clicked for me, where I went, okay, what I want to do is put together 21 10-page chapters. So I started to boil this down into its final form and cut it from those really kind of long sections. Like I cut out 28 pages on corn genetics, because you don't want that. It's 2 sentences now, right? We just glance off it. But I started to think about how, like, I could root a chapter with Albert Lee talking about coal and then move to, like, well, how did early coal mining on the southern Iowa Drift Plain work? Really well. It did drive that settlement, so much so that the people of Ottumwa decided, you know what we need? A coal palace. And everybody's obsessed with building monuments to their economic goods by the time we got to the late 1800s. Like, if you've been to Mitchell, South Dakota, they just ripped off the Iowa idea of the corn palace that originated in Sioux City. Or like where I used to live in Forest City, they built a palace out of flax once. Or I was recently speaking down in southwestern Iowa, in Creston, they built a bluegrass palace, and I was staring at those pictures really closely. I'm convinced that it's like Dwight Schrute's hay maze from The Office. And in Ottumwa, they built a 264-foot tall Byzantine castle out of coal. And the President of the United States came, and the Iowa State Band played, and there's a working coal mine inside, and then after 2 seasons of pretty good attendance, they tore the thing down. And I started to think about how these are these interwoven stories that then also lead us to places like Muchakinnock and Buxton, which are communities that have been written about much better by other historians. I mean, folks like Rochelle Case and the good God herself, Dorothy Schweeder, right? Thinking about, like, if you're not familiar with the story of Muchakinnock and Buxton, there are these 2 communities that are going to develop in conjunction, kind of with the railroad in southern Iowa coal mining, where the Consolidated Coal Company is going to go into the Jim Crow American South and recruit black workers and offer them an opportunity at a new life here in Iowa. And Buxton in particular is going to bloom into what Rochelle calls a black utopia. And it's not just black coal miners, it's black doctors and lawyers and the first black YMCA in the United States. And Buxton Wonders probably making the greatest upset in Iowa sports history, at least by my measure, and I'm pretty into sports. But then when the coal seams give out, that community also goes bust. And if you were to go to Buxton today, it's a collapsed-in granary building and a cemetery. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about the closing of the coal-fired generating station. I thought, okay, this is a simple way for me to start organizing this, where I'm going to put 21 chapters related to the days. I'm going to make them 10 pages each. I'm going to try to cut them into 2-page sections. And on every page, I'm going to try to have something that makes you go, huh, that's interesting. Because once again, I'm a pretty simple person. And in that way, it's like if we were to phone a friend to Pam Riney Kerberg, she'll tell you this book is a mile wide and an inch deep, and that's kind of by design. Mm-hmm. I want people to go on their own journey into Iowa history and use this, hopefully, as a jumping off point into the incredible work that so many other people have done, whether that's formally in the other books and articles and projects that people have put together. And I think to an extent it worked. I don't know. I hope it worked. I could be more, have greater humility. So why I think that? As the week before final exams, and one of my students showed up in my office with the book, which worried me. if he wasn't the type of student that was reading extra books for fun the week before final exams, I think he was trying to up his grade, maybe, you know, but not one. And if you ever find yourself at University of Northern Iowa, I'm a pretty easy grader to begin with. Nobody's that scared of me. I want people to just try. But he shows up and he goes, "Hey, I know what this is." I was like, "You're going to tell me?" Yeah. And he goes, "This is a gateway drug to Iowa history." And I was like, "What do you mean by that?" And he's like, "Well, I've just been reading it, and now, like, I got all these other books I got to read, and these different things I want to know about, and these places I got to go this summer to check out." And I was like, "Oh, all right, well, maybe if they print more of them, but just put it in this little blank spot on the back." And hopefully that will, like, and that was really what I was trying to think about in putting this book together, was like writing something, because this project, where it started as something else, at the core of this was always trying to, like, reach other people in our community, because I take doing community-oriented history very seriously. Like, I cut my teeth working on the most violent story in Iowa's history, and anytime I write about that, I know that the descendants of Abby Gardner Sharp are going to read it, and I know that the Kirshner family from Peterson's going to read it, and the people whose families were part of the militia at Smithland. And, like, before I came here tonight, I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of Inkpaduta's descendants, and I know they're going to read it. And all those people are going to interpret that differently, and that raises the level of care you have to work with these types of stories. Because I think, like I'm so lucky. I'm living like a last century life. Like, I got a tenure track job teaching history in the state I'm from. It's a thing that doesn't happen to people. Mm-hmm. And I don't take that for granted at all. And I think about how, like, as somebody who wants to work on our shared past, there has to be a level of connectivity with that hopefully brings our stories together in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, I think that's such a really nice answer that highlights what I think, and it helps to contextualize too for those who haven't read it, or maybe who have. Like, what was interesting to me as you read is you really are moving through both time and space at the same time. You know, you're reading about Saylorville, and then you're back, 100 years earlier, and you're kind of, hopscotching in a lot of ways, forward and backwards and forwards and backwards in ways that work. The center holds in a lot of ways, but it's still kind of this real almost mosaic or quilt, of putting all this together in ways that, now where do now I want to know more about Saylorville, and 1993 floods. I'm very interested in them anyway, but like some of my first memories to date myself are 1993 floods. But I thought that really comes through in your answer, but also I think for those who are going to read or have read, like the ways that it is a snapshot and an invitation. I wanted to ask you, I wanted to be cognizant of our time so that you all can ask questions. Something that jumped out to me as, maybe it's because I'm an editor, and maybe it's because I'm not an environmental historian. But throughout this, the environment has agency, which I'm all for. But what I also noticed is that the environment has a consciousness to it. The river, the trees, the grass, they like stand witness, which is like a step beyond standing. They're standing witness. The river, in one spot I remember in particular, is making decisions. I think it was in Saylorville, like the river has decided to do this, right? There's a consciousness that's being ascribed to the environment beyond just an agency, which, maybe this is because I, at one time in my life, spent a lot of time with words, not as much today as I used to. But I noticed that decision on language that I think some historians would not make. Some historians many would not make the move to ascribe consciousness, and some would not even want to ascribe agency. And so I just wonder if you could reflect on some of those choices that maybe, if you're reading quickly, you may not pick up on, but I think really tell us something about the way that you're conceptualizing the environment throughout the book.
So you can see why I really like to work with Andrew, right? Because he will ask you these questions that other people would never think of, right? So I think there's a couple of different things there. Environmental historians, which I've been trained as one, are more likely to ascribe agency to the environment. It's a common thing that, like, I do think the nature will kill you. I don't know. Or that nature's undefeated is a thing I like to say a lot, that we can do whatever we want, and sooner or later, the planet will get its due. I actually wonder, because I don't really have the answer, because I could tell you I really thought deeply about giving it agency, but I think actually one of the things that's bled into this is my longstanding collaboration with the Dakota in particular, in that they very much think about the world in a non-Western way that has this level of agency, and has nature as a conscious actor, as a part of this world that we cohabit together. And I don't even think like I recognize when I'm doing that anymore, because I've become so convinced, maybe, that I don't know. And that's kind of how I think about it. We were having a long conversation earlier today. If you're going to be out in Western Iowa 2 weeks from now, we're having a cool get-together with several of the descendants of Inkpaduta and some others out at Pilot Rock in Cherokee. And we were talking about how we're going to position that event because of the consciousness of the rock at Pilot Rock. And like, that's a thing I would normally never think about putting on an event, especially before I started kind of just having those conversations. And it's incredible how when you start to get to know people that conceptualize the world in an entirely different way than you do, how that will, whether consciously or unconsciously, start to reshape how you see the world around you. And I know that, like, we think about that agency. I mean, I also wrote a doctoral dissertation at Iowa State that basically was environmental agency grounded, called Forces of Nature. But I do think that that's continued to develop in ways where I do think that it also makes better narrative. That's maybe the simpler answer too. Like, I like to write that way because I want people to read the stuff. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it was something that stood out to me as maybe not a choice, maybe, but if nothing else, a reflection of a way that you're thinking about what rivers do, what the wind does, what trees do, right? Because I think a lot of historians would not think of rivers as deciding to do things, right? And so whether you're doing it for narrative flair or because or something else, there is something in there that some historians I would work with would never even think to use that verb that reflects a conscious decision, right?
But most of them would never try to write this book in this way either, right? That was one of the very intentional choices I made, was like, this wasn't going to be that type of book. Mm-hmm. And I also think, like, if you spend time, like there's the physical part of this project, which doesn't show up in the book in this very real way, undoubtedly changed how I conceptualize the Des Moines River, period. Like, outside of you, like, I don't know that anybody has spent more time with the Des Moines River, and like walking all the way up it over the course of that. It's like, now when I'm on Highway 20 heading out to Western Iowa and I cross the Des Moines, I feel like I'm seeing an old friend. And I have ascribed it, maybe it's just like you get loopy walking for miles in the heat. Like, I was thinking about on this earlier today, like one day I walked from basically Sec Taylor Stadium downtown to the beach at Big Creek State Park, and it was 106 degree heat index. And it's like, I maybe just lost my mind. I don't know. I don't know. I think that's I think all these things are great answers and really helpful, again, for framing the book. Thinking of the river as an old friend, is a really compelling way to frame an outcome of this book. So many of us historians think about, like, some of these archives, like the archive of Holland, Michigan, is an old friend. Like, for me, like, there's a building where there's a bunch of 90-year-olds who hang out, and that's where I did my dissertation research. And like, that building, like the Teal Center, is an old friend. And like, but for you, it's the river, and I think that comes through in a really compelling and exciting way in the book, right? Well, and I think, like, one of the things I've really been considering, this is like the 40th of these events I've done since the book came out. And if you want to come tomorrow, I'll be talking about it in Redfield, or you come to Indianola a couple of days from now. It'll be a little bit different program, but I've been thinking a lot about the folks that like don't ever show up in these footnotes, that are also like those people in archives, right? Like, it's not a mistake that I think about like many of, I mean, your colleagues, right? Like, think about Mike and Leo rolling up on their bikes to the Fort Des Moines site when I'm walking up the river and talking to me about that. Or like, I think about all of these different people in these communities that like would never show up in a footnote. And maybe it's because like I do history, so I know a lot of really old people. Or like earlier this summer, I had 2 funerals on the same day, both for women who wrote town histories in North Iowa. Like, what are the odds? And I was reflecting on that, and I've been thinking about it because I've put 6,000 miles on my new car since it got hail damaged at the first event on this tour. And so I've been spending a lot of windshield time. I was thinking about the first time I ever met this woman named Carol Whitus, and how like she influenced how I think about doing history, just period. Because when I first got hired at Waldorf College, and it was Waldorf College then, I was there and I was making my $25,000 a year, and I went to the Mansion Museum on North Clark Street in my little suit and tie, and I walked in the door and I was like, I'm the new history guy. And this woman, who was old, I mean, like, she was old then, she would have been 87 years old at the time. She looks at me and she goes, I know who you are. And I'm like, and she like didn't pause or break side, and she like gets up and she just starts like, she didn't move very fast, but she moved with great purpose. And she just makes her way over to, there's like a wall of file cabinets. And she just like, without hesitation, goes to like this middle one, and she pops it open and she pulls out a folder, and at the top it has Dan and Kay Mason, 1984 to 1992, written at the top, which aren't when my parents lived and died, it's when they lived in Forest City, Iowa. And she opens up this folder and starts telling me things about myself I don't know. Like, Forest City Most Beautiful Baby Contest, 1988, last place. 1991, your grandparents came. They had a nice visit. And then she tells me, like, you stick around long enough, you'll outgrow the file. And she turns, it's very cinematic in my mind, she goes, you'll get a binder. And there's a wall of binders. Because history people, you know, we love the binders with the plastic sheets. And she's like, and then if you get too big for the binder, you'll get a box. And then you go in the closet. And I'm like, I don't want to go in the closet. And I was thinking, I've been thinking about her a bunch, and just all of these other people, and it's so cool to see some of these people here tonight, because it's not lost on me the work that people have done in Iowa history, whether it's in big soaring books, or putting together museums, or doing the hard work of managing historic sites, or starting a water trails project, or whatever it may be. Like, Carol Whitus and Ruth Librand went to the Mansion Museum on North Clark Street in Forest City every Tuesday and Thursday from 1 to 4 p.m. from 1972 until a month ago. And they started to do that project as a secret, which is also crazy. They didn't want their husbands to know because they had to spend money. And so they got rebates from all of their friends, and they would send them in. This back when you get like, it's not like Menards rebates, like you get like 13 cents. And they stacked them all up, and eventually they bought a copy machine so they could start making these binders. And they hid it upstairs at Ruth's house because her husband couldn't go upstairs. It's a whole thing. Anyway, but I always think about how like the work that they put in is irreplaceable in that community. And like the projects I'm most proud of, like, are the things that happen when you're not thinking about it. Like I helped write a grant that eventually moved those boxes out of that closet, and we built a fireproof vault. So even though those 2 women are now gone, their work will be there in Forest City and preserve that town's past well into the future. And I don't know like what else, like I might never do anything again in my career. I mean, I might get hit by a bus leaving here, but I know that I'll be very proud of that. And I think that like those types of things are like, I don't know. When I think about agency and who's making history and how we're making history and all of those types of things, and I think that's important framing, and I don't know how it fits into how you understand this book, but I do think it's vital to understanding how I'm thinking about what we're doing in Iowa history and how we can all play a part in that. I'll get off the soapbox now. Sorry, I'm just like yelling about people I miss.
I think it's a really important way of framing for so many. So often you see the book, and I mean, so many of our colleagues, Pam Riney Kerberg says this, like you see the book, and she's the one talking about it, but there's all these people that are behind it, that aren't in the footnotes. They're the people who say, go look at that yearbook, or the people who say, let me tell you this story, right? There's so much of that in Iowa history, but just in history in general, that it is a group project. It's a group project.
Oh, I got one more quick one, and then I don't know. You can ask whatever other questions you got. So I got two thoughts on that. First, I've been thinking a lot this summer about history as a puzzle, because Charity Nebby's smarter than me, and she kind of put this into perspective for me in a conversation we were having earlier this spring, of like, if you're going to do history as a group project here, it's like we're all working on different pieces of this puzzle. So like in that Spirit Lake story, like Mike, you got a piece of that puzzle, you got a pretty important piece that you're working on all the time and is probably a headache to put together. And I've got a piece of that puzzle, and so does Chief Brown, and so do the Descendants of Abby Gardner Sharp. And we're all putting together these different pieces of this puzzle. And if we can all do that and work together, we can see the big picture so much more clearly than we could on our own. And so I've been thinking about that a lot. I've also been thinking about, like, as a process, one other way that this book came together was one of those local history moments. If you know me, I'm obsessed with drain tile, especially drain tile factories.
Gosh, don't get us started. Because I am also obsessed with drain tile.
We can call Joe Otto. We'll get him on FaceTime. We'll really get it rolling.
And then we're not leaving. Buckle in. But drain tile for the next hour.
So a lot of times, like, you go to the archive here, right? Or you go to the Minnesota Historical Society, or down to Missouri, where a lot of the Dragoon stuff is. Or even, like, this book took me to the National Archives in D.C., and you learn all sorts of different things. But I'm a huge believer in the due diligence of, like, showing up in small local places where people really know, because they're doing that work. And so when I was working on this section on drain tile in this book, I found myself at the Kinney Pioneer Museum in Mason City. And I went in there, and all sorts of other places working on this, and I was living in Mason City at the time, so it should have been one of my first stops. And I walked through the door, and I asked the person working at the desk, like, hey, you guys got any drain tile stuff? And she's like, well, we've got a glass case with some examples. We've got some binders with plastic sheets. She's like, what you really need is Mark. She's like, don't worry, I'll go get him. And she walked out the front door. And I was just like, and you've probably never been to the Kinney Pioneer Museum, but it's like large and quiet, and I'm just in there for like 8 to 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden this side door just bangs open, and this guy comes in with just incredible, like, a force of nature, and he's covered from head to toe in cement, and he goes, I heard you want to talk about drain tile. And because, like, local history people are doing all sorts of different stuff, he was putting in a sidewalk that day, and he goes, you should really come to my house. I've got a huge collection of drain tile. And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Yeah. Because my best pieces are in this case. And I put together these binders because my family worked in the drain tile and cement factories in Mason City for 4 generations. And this one's on advertising, and this one's on process, and this one's about how we hosted this conference, and this one's about Lehigh Row, where Greek settlement came. And then all of a sudden he just stopped cold, and he looked at me, and he said, I'm sorry. I'm just so excited to have somebody to share this magic with. And I can tell you, like, I don't know if I learned anything about drain tile from Mark that day, but I do know that I went home and I took out a note card and I wrote in permanent marker on it, share the magic, and I taped it to my computer. And then I cut 150,000 words out of this book by thinking about that as kind of a guiding principle in this. And that's where it's like, people make all the difference in history, and history is only real when it's shared. I think a lot of us get into this because, like, at least the 18 to 22-year-old dudes that show up in my classroom, they all think they're going to know it all. And at one point in time, I was that kid. And eventually you realize that there's no way to do that, and history only works when it's shared between all of us. And there is a magic there that we can all have a part of. And this book really is my kind of attempt to share that magic with all you. Thanks for humoring me on that very long story.
Oh, no. I think we got through about 3 of the questions I planned, and then I asked a lot of other ones, and we talked, but I promised you 15 to 20 minutes for you to ask your questions, and I am nothing if not prompt. So it is, we are 40, that's true.
Yeah, I love
Have
it.
I told you 45 minutes? We're doing 45. So we've got about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. I have plenty more, so we will talk, but what questions do you have? Yeah, Mike.
Was it because of Albert book that the 1835 Dragoon expedition got more attention than the numerous other ones predating and post-dating?
I'm gonna repeat that question so everybody
Yeah,
can
go
hear. So the question is, was it because of Albert Lee's book that the Dragoons who traversed the Des Moines River got more attention than some of the other expeditions? In short, that's a
I
paraphrase.
knew that you were going to ask, what's a dragoon, Mike? Which I thought would be the first question somebody asked. I do think that that's true to an extent, right? So Albert Lee's going to write this book. Half the copies go down in the Ohio River right after it's published, and then many circulate widely throughout the eastern United States and Europe. And I think that part of me wants to say yes, because I'm like an Albert Lee homer, and now I'm tied to this story. But I think there's other people writing in really meaningful ways about Iowa during that time period too. So I don't know that it's just his book. I do think that there's just an overarching significance to this scale and then the impact of their journey. So like you can take it with a grain of salt. I've spent too much time with these Dragoons, so I'm pretty biased towards them. You think about they cover well over 1,100 miles during the summer of 1835. They're going to leave what's called First Fort Des Moines at Montrose, just north of Keokuk. They ascend the ridge between the Des Moines and the Skunk River. So if you want to think it as Highway 163, it's an easy way to think about it. And eventually they're going to come here. They're going to locate the site of Second Fort Des Moines, which eventually blooms into our capital city. They are then going to ascend the Boone River and head all the way over towards Winona, Minnesota, and come back and all the way down. And I think that they're partially in the right place at the right time for this impact, right? We're post-Indian Removal Act of 1830. We're post what people commonly call the Black Hawk War in 1832. The treaties are already in motion that are starting to dispossess and remove the Sauk and Meskwaki in particular from the southern half of the state. And the Dragoons' legacy can be seen writ large across the Iowa of today in a really meaningful way, which is one of the things that drew me to them. You think about, and because it's not only First Fort Des Moines and Second Fort Des Moines, it's also they're going to eventually locate the site of Fort Dodge. And that plays such a critical role in how the frontier unfolds across this part of the country and really writes the first chapters of Iowa's history, I think, in a really meaningful way. Now, like, was Stephen Watts Kearney's 1820 expedition as significant? Maybe. Like, it depends on if you're like Jim Dinsmore writing about wildlife, then yes. But I think like writ large, and take it with a grain of salt because I'm now like 1835 Dragoon homer, but I think huge significance, and part of it is Albert Lee's.
Excellent. Other questions? Yeah.
My question is, what can we do about the Dragoon Trail signs that have deteriorated and need to be replaced?
Man, people are asking me that question a lot, which is good. Adrit last night, that was a hot topic.
Did everyone hear the question? Can we hear it? The question is, what do we do about the Dragoon signs that need to be replaced? Sorry, I'm going to be that like teacher who makes sure everybody, even in the back, can hear.
Great. I appreciate it too.
I've got a very limited job. Ask you questions, make sure everyone else's questions can be heard. The rest of you're doing the heavy lifting.
Keep this like bowling ball on the alley,
Yeah.
right? So there's been all sorts of different movement. Now I hear about it all, right? Because if people are interested in the Dragoon Trail, they're sending me an email. And there's a guy, and maybe, I don't know if you're here or not, because I've never met this person in person, that's an engineer here in Des Moines that is very interested in this, has been trying to get a group together to like, I don't know what the broader plan is, but he has the same concern, right? These signs are in pretty rough shape in places. The route is not super well marked, and we've also talked about, like, it'd be really interesting to mark the broader Dragoon route instead of, if you're unfamiliar, the Department of Transportation has a Dragoon Trail auto route. The signs, maybe you've seen them, they run through Des Moines. They're brown and black and have a guy with a funny hat and a rifle on them.
The ones that you can make that out.
Sure.
Some of them are so worn that you can't even see that.
And that DOT auto route runs basically from Lake Red Rock up through Fort Dodge and Webster City. So it's a significant part of their route, but it's only a small part of the route. I don't know. Let's figure something out. Start a group. You've made lots of things happen in your life. There's an Iowa DNR Water Trails project because you cared enough about that. And I think that that's something that, like...
That was how I started. I followed the Dragoon Trail, and it kept taking me down to water and boat. Well, that was my whole starting the One River Water Trail experience. Was based on the Dragoon Trail.
And, like, there's something that's so important in that, right? That, like... And you were one of the first day one believer people in this project that reached out to me and you were like, hey, this is a cool thing you're doing. You're like, are you going to dress like a dragoon? Are you going to take a horse? Were for two of the first questions you asked me. And I think, like, the more I got to know you and the more I got to know the difference that you've made for the Des Moines River, it really inspired me to think about how, like, we all can do these different things. That like, we are the people that have to make these things happen. I think a lot of times we think about, like, the stuff that happens around us is a group of other people that makes it happen. And what I've learned in history repeatedly is that, like, well, it's somebody going like, well, let's get together and think about what we can do about these Dragoon Trail signs. Where can we form groups? How can we build momentum? And how can we actually make the things happen? And that's something that I'm happy to explore. If other people are in, let's start a group. I don't know. Let's get it going.
Yeah, let's do that.
We'll do Jerome, and then we'll go to the back.
Kevin, I just wanted to comment. In 217 pages, you've encapsulated a short history of Iowa history from Boneyard Hollow to the farm crisis in the 1980s. And I think that's an amazing accomplishment. Dr. Brewer at Iowa State would probably.
So the comment was that, you know, in some ways, that Kevin has really written a history of Iowa from the very beginning all the way up to the farm crisis and the 1993 floods. And in some ways, mirroring, I think, Jeff Bremer's more recent new history of Iowa, which takes a different approach to telling the whole story of the state. Yeah, and if you haven't read Jeff's book, buy that first. No, I don't know. I always joke with Jeff that I'm going to write a newer history of Iowa and put him out of business. No, very different approaches. And back to, like, this book, I mean, I had a lot of the research done for this book before I read Jeff's book because it came out pretty recently. Jeff is one of those historians that, like, blows my mind in that he is more meticulous than I will ever hope to be. He, like, the last 6 times I've gone to the archives, he's also been there, which tells me that he's there all the time. Like, I think he just sleeps in the stacks at the State Historical Society. We check. He does leave.
But our goals are very different, right? That was one of the things that I think is important to think about is, like, whether you're trying to write this book or any other kind of book, and I don't have that much advice on writing books because, as I said earlier, I don't even think about it that much. I just try to write, and I just do it every day, and I write a lot of bad stuff most of the time, and a lot of it's internet garbage for those of you that follow the notes on Iowa.
Read them every day. Really like them.
I like some of them more than others. But it's like, Jeff told me something when this book was coming out. We were having dinner in Sioux Falls last fall. And it's funny that we had to get together in Sioux Falls to have that dinner. But he said, like, he told me something. He's like, I'm really excited for your book because all energy into Iowa history is good energy. And I was like, I like that, and I've been thinking about that quite a bit. And if you're not familiar with Jeff, he's writing a book about Des Moines right now that is going to be mind blowing when it's done, because he is that meticulous. And also Jerome, thanks a lot. That means a lot to me. You're somebody I really look up to.
I think that really that was something as I was reading, that this in some ways is a companion to what Jeff is doing, because you can read them side by side, taking a very different approach, but you're covering, no pun intended, the watershed, of Iowa history in both of them. So we had a question in the back, and then we'll come up here to the front.
Kevin, I hesitate to say this in polite company, but I'm a native of Minnesota, in Iowa by way of local college, and so Albert Lee and I are well acquainted over the years. And then I started teaching and coaching at Johnston High School in 2002, and it's been my life mission to make the Dragons the Dragoons. That's the slogan. So if you'd be interested in partnering on that.
Yeah, 100%. I'd be very into that. I was speaking in Boone last month, and when I told them they should change their nickname to the Dragoons because their town's named for Nathan Boone, who was a Dragoon, that did not go over well. Then they were like,
The Boone Dragoons?
that's how I was like, can you at least give me like the youth sports teams? But
Yeah.
Johnston seems like
We're on the trail.
I'm all for localizing. This is a broader stance that I will not belabor here, but like, why can't we have interesting sports nicknames? Like, I was so disappointed. Like, Mason City had this great opportunity to become the 76ers and celebrate their Meredith Wilson heritage, and instead they're like, Iowa needs more teams that are the Hawks. And you're like, come on. I say that as a proud Pella Little Dutchman, which
I grew up next door to the Sheldon Orabs.
I still don't understand what that is. I was
It's not a
driving
thing.
past there last week,
It's just
and
a
it
name.
says it on the side of the building, and I thought for like 45 minutes about like,
It's orange and black.
yeah,
orange
I
and
know.
black.
It's like,
And it's just a big old O. Yep.
I love it.
Yeah.
More like that.
Yeah.
Back to the construction of the club, do you actually have a 1835 map in there, and then a current one, so that if we're reading it, we can follow along in the map?
I don't, but you can take my card off that table in the back, and I'll send you the best scan I have of Albert Lee's really poorly scanned map. No, maps. So one of the things that I thought about a lot with this book, and I was very fortunate that this book got some good interest from publishers, and you might be looking at it and be like, Michigan State University Press, weird choice. So a couple of things. First, I really wanted this book to be in an accessible price point, and that's one of the reasons why I landed at Michigan State was they offered me the best price point. And also very much believed in the book. But part of that negotiation was that I had as few images and maps as possible. So there's one map in here. There's all sorts of other stuff stacked into. I haven't built specific companions to this on Notes on Iowa, but there are a ton of Dragoon things on that website. But also if you send me an email, I will email you back and send you whatever you're looking for. I got a great collection of Iowa maps. I'm going to speak about it at the Newberry Library in Chicago on Halloween, so you can wear a costume if you want to go and hear me talk Iowa maps.
Yeah.
Captain Allen, who was with the Dragoons and was active at Fort Des Moines, when he left Des Moines to go to California and ultimately died, I think, at Leavenworth, his family member, B.F. Allen, came, and a lot of the property that B.F. Allen got, he's the guy that built Terrace Hill, was because of Captain Allen's activity and acquiring ground that he ended up obtaining. And that's all that wealth that he had. Did you see any of that in your research?
The question is about the Allen family, essentially a brother and who inherited land and has connections to Terrace Hill. So that's a very brief summary, but enough if you didn't hear it to understand what Kevin's going to say.
So Captain James Allen becomes the commandant of 2nd Fort Des Moines, which is our Fort Des Moines here in the capital city. And then he's going to lead a pretty important northwestern Iowa Dragoon expedition later on that goes into the Dakotas. I actually want to zoom it out from him because the Dragoons finding land grants or purchasing lands in Iowa was very common. Many of them, whether it's a military service land grant, which was a process very popular during the early republic, or just broadly speculating in lands. Like, I actually think Albert Lee's book doesn't exist if he's not speculating heavily in lands, trying to convince people to move to Iowa. I always joke that he'd be a great Chamber of Commerce person. And so we can kind of see them if you start to follow those land records, which is not an exhaustive thing I was going to do in this type of book. But there is certainly evidence, Terrace Hill being an exceptional example, of those lands finding their way into not just the hands of dragoons and then passed along to other significant figures in Iowa history, but then becoming these really significant parcels, and maybe partially because they had like this incredible view of these lands, right? You're the people doing not the government survey work, but you're doing the actual government exploratory work, as they would have called it. And then you kind of have this better lay of the land. This is an American tradition unlike any other, dating back before the American Revolution. Some historians would argue that George Washington was so gung-ho for the Revolution because he had been stationed in the Ohio Valley and was hoping to speculate in those lands. But anyway, I'll save you the tangent. Yeah, certainly a thing. Kathy.
When you walked, did you walk along the ridge line like Dragoons, when you were down next to the, because it would be much easier to walk the ridge lines?
The question is, did you walk along the ridge line or did you walk along the river? So if you noticed earlier, I said that I walked 371 miles. The Dragoons covered well over like 1,100. When I started to put together the route, Iowa's has changed as much as anywhere on planet Earth across the 1800s. And the Des Moines River has changed heavily, right? You think about, even just here in this neighborhood, the Saylorville Dam, let alone the Red Rock Dam, let alone the Des Moines Lock and Navigation Project during an earlier era. When I started to try to put together this route, it became this incredible puzzle. And then also there's over 200 dragoons. They're on horseback, and they're like spreading out at different points in time. So I pretty quickly decided, all right, what my plan is going to be. I'm going to stick as close to the Des Moines River as possible. I'm going to be on gravel as much as possible. And then I'm going to have a support vehicle the whole time. I don't want to misguide anybody or mislead you. Like, I was not like through hiking this. Like, my wife came for the first part, I think largely so she could tell me like, I told you so on the first day when I packed it in, which I almost did. My brother, who's here, helped me for part of it. My mom helped me for part of it. And then, my dad helped me for the last part. But when it came to the route, I was trying to, I'm trying to see how these changes stack up against the things they're writing. And so I could do that pretty easily by sticking to the river, because they're going to ultimately follow the river all the way back from essentially at least Emmetsburg. And that seemed like the most logical thing for me to be able to do without having to think about things like trespass, without thinking about safety that much, and just trying to keep it as simple as possible in a manageable way that would allow me to accomplish my goal of stacking their records against maybe what the Iowa of 2021 looked like. Sounds great. I think we have time for one more question, if there's one out there.
Hey, I just wanted to mention that I believe Albert Lee, when he got their return, got some Indian guys, dug out a canoe, and then followed the morning. He actually floated the morning river.
Yeah, certainly from the Raccoon at least. And I always joke that he was so tired of the expedition that he decided he had to float the rest of the way, which when I originally conceptualized this project, I thought I was going to walk up the river and float back down it, which I eventually just abandoned as non-practical. But there's a future. Maybe we just do that next summer. Yeah.
That's what I did. That's what I was
I know,
thinking
yeah.
about. Yeah.
I'm still waiting for you to write that.
No, you wrote the book.
Do you think you could do the same boat doing the Dragoon Trail from Yellow River to Blood Run?
I know this is your dream.
I'm 10 years older now.
Hey, we could still do it, Jerome. I believe in us. Yeah, that would be super interesting. I'm trying to not get pigeonholed into being the guy who does weird walking projects, and that's my whole career. So if you want to ask me, nobody asked me the what's next question, but I can tell you pretty easily because I've been working very hard on a history of Iowa from 1825 to 1857, which is what Jeff Bremer calls a black hole of Iowa history, which I don't think is necessarily true. Like Dykstra would hate that, but there's certainly people that have written things about it, right? And that book, I just finished the second draft of that, and I have it with some of the tribal partners that I work with, trying to, parse out knowledge that I don't have and understand things that maybe I don't understand, and why I chose 1825. That's the first major treaty, the multinational Treaty of Prairie du Chien, that draws boundaries between Indigenous peoples in the upper Midwest. And then 1857 is, from a narrative perspective, really logical to me. It's when the Meskwaki return and establish a settlement in Tama, and it's also when the violence explodes at Spirit Lake, and the Dakota are out of Iowa, at least for that time period. And that's probably the book I should have written. It's like what the historians would have told me to write instead of this. But I knew, like, one of the things, working with Indigenous communities, especially as like me, it's something that takes all sorts of time to build that trust. And those communities don't owe me anything. In fact, like, working with them is something that I knew I needed more time to build those relationships, to get better insights into where the historical record maybe fails those communities in really real ways. And so that's what I'm working on now. Maybe after that, if you're still game, we'll walk the Sheminda Voyagers. Bionic legs.
Yeah. Well, great. I think that's a great place to stop. I think we could keep talking all night, but we're about at the time I told you we'd wrap up, and so we're going to wrap up. Kevin's going to stick around. There's books there for purchase, for signing, for more questions, but let's thank Kevin for being here and Beaverdale with us.